The basement door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the lock click into place. My son Aaron stood on the other side, his shadow blocking the crack of light under the door. "Just for a few hours, Dad," he said through the wood. "Tasha's cleaning upstairs. You'll be safer down here." Safer. The word tasted like rust in my mouth. I'm 72 years old, not senile. I know what a locked door means. The basement smelled of mold and old paint cans. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting shadows that looked like prison bars on the concrete walls. I pressed my palm against the door, feeling its cold surface. This wasn't about cleaning. This was about erasing me. My chest tightened as I realized the truth. They weren't planning to let me out anytime soon. That night, sitting on the bottom step with my knees aching, I understood something darker. This wasn't temporary. They weren't cleaning anything upstairs. They were preparing to make me disappear. When Aaron finally unlocked the door 6 hours later, he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Sorry, Dad." Lost track of time. His wife Tasha stood behind him, arms crossed, watching me climb the stairs like I was a stranger in her house. My house. The one I'd helped them buy when they had nothing but dreams and debt. "You've been getting confused lately," Aaron said, his voice too gentle, too practiced. "We found you near the stove yesterday. You could have hurt yourself." I wanted to laugh. I hadn't cooked in 3 weeks. They knew it. I knew it. But Aaron kept talking about safety and responsibility and how much they cared. Each word felt like a shovel of dirt landing on a coffin. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept his concern. But inside, a different kind of clarity was forming. I started wondering how long they'd been rehearsing these lies, planning each step toward making me vanish. That evening, Tasha set the dining table with only 2 plates, 2 wine glasses, 2 cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. I stood in the doorway, watching them sit down to roasted chicken with herbs I could smell from across the room. "We already ate, Henry," Tasha said without looking up. She gestured to the counter where a paper plate held a slice of white bread and a spoonful of cold baked beans. My stomach growled, but I swallowed the hunger along with my pride. I took the paper plate to my room, the small guest bedroom they'd moved me into last month when they needed the master suite for themselves. The chicken had been my recipe. I taught Aaron how to season it when he was 12, back when his mother was still alive. Now he ate it without me, and I chewed stale bread in silence. As I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, I realized hunger wasn't the worst thing they'd forced me to swallow. The next afternoon, I walked into the living room and froze. The wall above the fireplace was empty. My wife's portrait, Margaret's gentle smile and oil paint, was gone. Just a clean rectangle where it had hung for 40 years. "Where's the painting?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. Tasha looked up from her phone. "Too much clutter, Henry. We're going for a modern look." All those old memories were bringing down the energy. Old memories. Margaret had died 8 years ago, but her smile still warmed every room she'd ever entered. That portrait had survived 2 house fires and a flood. It couldn't survive Tasha's interior design plans. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I found it in the garbage bin outside, face down in coffee grounds and wet newspapers. I cleaned it carefully and hid it under my bed. And as I lay there in the dark, I decided, if they wanted to bury me, I'd make sure they joined me in that grave. 3 nights later, I woke to voices. Aaron was on his phone in the hallway, speaking in that hushed tone people use when they think walls are soundproof. The lawyer said once we get him declared mentally unfit, the inheritance transfers automatically. Power of attorney covers everything. My body went cold. Power of attorney. I'd signed those papers 6 months ago when I had my hip surgery. Aaron had promised it was just temporary, just in case something happened during the operation. I'd trusted him completely. "We just need to document more incidents," Aaron continued. The stove thing helped. Maybe a few more episodes, and we're clear. When he hung up and passed my door, I pretended to snore softly. He didn't even glance inside. The next morning, he smiled at me over breakfast, asking how I'd slept. I smiled back, already planning my next move. That smile would be the last honest thing I ever gave him. My wallet disappeared the next morning. I always kept it in my nightstand drawer, but when I reached for it, my hand found only dust. "Tasha," I called out, keeping my voice confused and helpless. She appeared in my doorway, all concern and eyebrows. "What's wrong, Henry?" "My wallet. I can't find it anywhere." She nodded slowly, like she was dealing with a child. "I found it in the laundry this morning." You must have left it in your pants pocket. Here." She handed it over, but I noticed immediately the three $20 bills I'd had were gone. Only my ID and expired insurance card remained. I didn't say anything. I just nodded gratefully, playing the forgetful old man she needed me to be. But I was taking notes now. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal. I wrote them down in the margins of an old Bible I kept under my mattress. Little did they know, the helpless old man they pitied was already building their destruction, one careful note at a time. They locked the basement door on me again 4 days later. "Just for tonight, Dad," Aaron said, not quite looking at me. "Tasha needs the upstairs quiet. She has a migraine." A migraine. The excuse was so thin I could see through it like glass, but I didn't argue. I descended the stairs slowly, making sure they heard each careful step. The door closed. The lock clicked. This time, they left me there all night. The concrete floor was freezing. My knees ached where they pressed against the cold stone as I tried to find a comfortable position. There wasn't one. Around midnight, I heard them laughing upstairs. The television was on. No migraine. No cleaning. Just two people enjoying their evening while I shivered in the dark. I whispered Margaret's name into the silence and made a promise to her memory. I would make them remember who I was. Not as their burden. Not as their inheritance. As their lesson. When dawn light finally crept through the basement window, I started memorizing every sound above me. Their footsteps. Their voices. Their patterns. Their sins. Mrs. Caldwell knocked on the front door on a Tuesday morning. I heard her voice through the basement vent. "Haven't seen Mr. Cole in a few weeks. Just wanted to make sure everything's all right." Tasha's laugh was light and musical. "Oh, Henry's doing great. He actually went to stay with a cousin upstate for a bit. Change of scenery, you know. Doctor's orders." I pressed my face against the heating vent, trying to whisper, trying to make any sound that would reach Mrs. Caldwell's ears. But my voice was too weak, the vent too narrow. "Well, if you talk to him, tell him I have some of his mail," Mrs. Caldwell said. I heard paper rustling. "I'll just leave my card here in case he needs anything when he gets back." When Tasha closed the door, I heard her tear something up. Probably Mrs. Caldwell's card. But I'd heard the concern in my neighbor's voice. That concern was a crack in their perfect lie. All I needed was for Mrs. Caldwell to come back. Just one more time. One small crack could split their whole foundation. That night, I wrote a letter. I had a stub of pencil I'd found in an old toolbox and some paper torn from the back of a yellowed phone book. My hands shook as I wrote, but the words came clearly. "My name is Henry Cole. I am being held in the basement of my own home by my son Aaron and his wife Tasha. They have stolen my money. They have locked me away. They plan to have me declared unfit. If you are reading this, please contact Adult Protective Services." I folded it carefully and waited until I heard them go to bed. Then I slid it through the gap in the heating vent, praying it would somehow reach the main floor where Mrs. Caldwell might find it if she came back. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From resolve. From the absolute certainty that I would not die in this basement. If that letter reached her, everything would change. If it didn't, I would find another way. I always had. They took my car keys the next week. "Your driving days are over, Dad," Aaron announced at breakfast like he was reading a weather report. "You're not steady anymore. We can't risk you hurting yourself or someone else." I nodded slowly, playing the part. But inside, I was smiling. What Aaron didn't know was that I'd hidden a spare key to my old pickup truck years ago. Margaret used to tease me about my hiding places. "You think too far ahead, Henry," she'd say. The spare key was under the third stair in the basement, tucked into a crack in the concrete where I'd loosened the board years ago during a repair job. I'd forgotten about it myself until last night when I was studying my prison for weaknesses. Now it felt like providence. That key wasn't just a memory anymore. It was my escape route. It was my insurance. It was proof that the old man they'd underestimated had been preparing for disaster longer than they'd been planning my destruction. Tasha installed a camera in the basement the following Monday. "It's just a baby monitor," she explained, adjusting the angle. "So we can make sure you're okay down here." But I noticed where she pointed it. Not at the stairs where I might fall. Not at the door where I might need help. Directly at my face. At the corner where I usually sat. They were documenting my decline, recording evidence for their unfit declaration. Every morning after that, I made sure to wave at the camera. Big, slow waves like a child. Sometimes I'd talk to it, rambling about nothing. The weather, old memories, confusion about what day it was. I gave them exactly what they wanted to see. An old man losing his grip. But what they didn't know was that I was watching back, learning their schedule, timing their movements, mapping their routines. That camera would catch something eventually, just not what they expected. It would catch the moment their careful plan started crumbling. And I would make sure I was smiling when it happened. Mrs. Caldwell came back on a Thursday. I heard her voice upstairs, quieter this time, more cautious. "I'm sorry to bother you again, Tasha, but I could have sworn I heard something last time I was here. Like someone calling out." My heart hammered in my chest. I pressed my mouth to the heating vent and whispered her name. "Mrs. Caldwell. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm down here." But my voice was too weak. The words dissolved into the metal grating. "Just the old pipes," Tasha said smoothly. "This house makes all kinds of noise. Henry's still upstate, but I'll tell him you asked about him when he calls." There was a long pause. I held my breath, praying Mrs. Caldwell's instincts were as sharp as I remembered. "All right," she finally said. "But if he comes back and needs anything, you let me know." When the door closed, I sat back against the cold wall. She hadn't heard me, but she'd hesitated. That hesitation was a seed of doubt. And if I'd learned anything in 72 years, it's that doubt, once planted, always finds a way to grow. My 73rd birthday came and went without a word. No cake, no card, not even an acknowledgement. I sat in the basement listening to them laugh upstairs, hearing the clink of wine glasses celebrating something I wasn't part of. When they finally went to bed, I whispered into the darkness of my prison. "One day, you'll remember this day for the rest of your lives." I meant it, not as a threat, but as a promise. A promise I intended to keep starting the very next morning, because I'd spent the last 3 weeks loosening one of the stairs. Just slightly, just enough that it would creak dangerously underweight. Just enough that someone rushing down in the dark might not notice until it was too late. I'm not a violent man, never have been, but I've learned that justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel and a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives with careful planning, patience, and a stare that's just weak enough to betray the person who thinks they're standing on solid ground. The storm came 2 nights later. Rain hammered the roof like accusations, and the power went out around midnight. I heard them moving around upstairs in the dark, cursing and fumbling. Then came a knock at the front door. Loud, insistent. "Hello? Is everything all right in there?" Mrs. Caldwell's voice cut through the storm. I held my breath in the pitch-black basement. This was it. This was the moment. "We're fine," Aaron called out, opening the door. "Just a power outage." "I thought I heard something earlier," Mrs. Caldwell said. "Like someone calling for help." "Just the pipes," Tasha said quickly. Too quickly. Old houses and storms, you know how it is. There was a long silence. I could feel Mrs. Caldwell's doubt growing even from down here. "All right," she finally said. "But I'm going to check back tomorrow in the daylight. Make sure everything's okay." The door closed. I exhaled slowly. She didn't push tonight. But the storm wasn't done. Not outside. And not inside this house either. When the power came back on the next morning, I began my real work. Every night for a week, I loosened the 3rd stair just a little more. During the day, I gathered evidence. I used the pencil to mark every bruise on my arms from the cold basement floor. I scratched dates into the concrete wall with a nail. Every day they locked me down here. I found an old cassette recorder in a box of junk and tested it. Still worked. I started recording their conversations through the vent, their casual cruelty captured in magnetic tape. They thought they had me trapped. They thought they were watching me deteriorate. But they had no idea that every lock has a weakness. Every prison has a crack. I wasn't trying to break out anymore. I was building something bigger. A trap of my own. And they were walking right into it, one careless step at a time, completely unaware that the foundation beneath them was already crumbling. I found the folder in Aaron's study during one of the rare moments they let me upstairs to use the bathroom. It was labeled Life Policy, Henry Cole, in Tasha's neat handwriting. Inside were insurance documents. My signature at the bottom, but I'd never seen these papers before. Someone had forged my name. Beneficiary, Aaron Cole. Payout amount, $250,000. My hands went numb. This wasn't just about control anymore. This wasn't about inheritance or power of attorney. They were planning for my death. Expecting it. Maybe even arranging it. I carefully put the folder back exactly as I'd found it and returned to the basement without a word. That night, I didn't feel afraid. I felt something colder. Clearer. For the first time since this nightmare began, I understood exactly how far they were willing to go, and I realized I was willing to go further. Because they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed I would die quietly. They didn't know I was already planning their resurrection. Their resurrection as people who would never escape what they'd done. The fall happened on a Wednesday night. I heard Tasha coming down the basement stairs in the dark, probably to check on me or adjust that camera. Her footsteps were quick, confident. Too confident. The third stair gave way with a crack that echoed through the house. She screamed, a sharp, terrified sound, and then the heavy thud of her body hitting the concrete floor. Tasha! Erin's voice, panicked, running. I sat in my corner, completely still. For once, she was the one trapped. The one in pain. The one calling for help that didn't come fast enough. Erin's footsteps pounded down the stairs. Oh God, don't move. I'm calling 911. I listened to him cry her name, heard the desperation in his voice. The same desperation he'd ignored in mine for months. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of watching karma arrive early. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this fall would trigger the exact chain of events I needed. Because when the ambulance came, the paramedics would ask questions. And questions, once started, have a way of finding answers. 2 days later, someone knocked on the door. Not Mrs. Caldwell this time. Mr. Henry Cole, a woman's voice called through the door. I'm Victoria Hayes from Adult Protective Services. We received a report of concern regarding your welfare. I heard Erin scramble upstairs. There must be some mistake, he started. May I speak with Mr. Cole directly, please? The voice was firm, professional, leaving no room for negotiation. Footsteps on the basement stairs. The lock turning. And then light. Beautiful, overwhelming light as the door opened fully for the first time in weeks. A woman in her 40s stood there with a clipboard, her eyes taking in everything. The camera pointed at my corner. The makeshift bed on the floor. The marks on the wall. Mr. Cole, are you all right? I blinked at her like a man seeing the sun after years underground. I've been locked in this basement, I said quietly, by my son and his wife. For weeks. Erin started to protest, but Victoria held up her hand. Sir, please step back. Mr. Cole, would you like to come upstairs with me? I climbed those stairs slowly, letting every ache show. Freedom had a smell, fresh air and fear. Their fear, not mine. This was just the beginning. Justice was still waiting. Victoria Hayes sat me down at my own kitchen table, the first time I'd sat there in 2 months. She offered me water, asked me questions, took photographs of the bruises on my arms. Tell me everything, Mr. Cole. Take your time. So I did. I told her about the locked basement, the stolen wallet, the missing portrait, the forged insurance policy I'd found, the letter they'd written declaring me mentally unfit. Every detail came out calm and clear. I'd been practicing this testimony in my head for weeks. Erin tried to interrupt twice. Dad's confused. He has memory problems. Victoria's pen never stopped moving. Sir, I'll need to speak with you separately. Please wait in the other room. When the police arrived an hour later, they took statements from everyone. They photographed the basement. They bagged the camera as evidence. I didn't look at Erin once during the whole process. There was nothing left to say to him. This was the last time he'd ever speak to me as a free man. And I wanted him to remember my silence more than any words I could have spoken. The arrests happened the next afternoon. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen, not theirs, when the police cars pulled up. 2 officers walked to the door with handcuffs ready. Erin Cole and Tasha Cole, you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, and unlawful imprisonment. I watched through the window as they were read their rights. Tasha was crying, mascara running down her face. Erin's expression was blank, empty, like he couldn't understand how this had happened, how the helpless old man had outmaneuvered them completely. They were led to separate police cars. As Erin passed the kitchen window, our eyes met for just a second. I raised my coffee mug to him slightly. A toast. A goodbye. A final lesson delivered without words. When the cars drove away, I sat back at the table and ate a hot meal for the first time in months. Real food. Roasted chicken with herbs. My recipe. The house felt different now. Not empty. Just quiet. Clean. Mine again. And as I ate, I tasted something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Peace. But I knew it wasn't finished cooking yet. The authorities transferred the house back into my name within 2 weeks. All the documents Aaron had prepared, all the power of attorney paperwork, all the plans to have me declared unfit, worthless. I spent my first free weekend cleaning. I took Margaret's portrait out from under the bed and hung it back above the fireplace where it belonged. Her smile seemed brighter now, like she approved. The basement door stayed open. I couldn't bring myself to close it yet. Maybe I never would. Maybe it needed to stay open as a reminder, not of what they did to me, but what I'd survived. I bought new locks for every door, changed every password, called the bank and secured every account. I even had the third stair properly repaired, though I left the crack in the concrete where I'd hidden my truck key. Some reminders are worth keeping. At night, I still heard echoes sometimes. The click of that lock. The sound of my own breathing in the dark. Freedom was real, but forgiveness would take much longer. And I was okay with that. Some things shouldn't be forgiven quickly. Word spread through the neighborhood fast. Within a week, people I hadn't seen in months started appearing at my door. Mrs. Caldwell brought me a casserole and cried on my porch. I should have pushed harder, she kept saying. I knew something was wrong. I told her that her instinct had saved me, that her persistence had planted the seed of doubt that eventually grew into my rescue. She hugged me like I was her own father. Other neighbors came too. Some apologized for not checking sooner. Others just wanted to make sure I was all right. A few asked questions about the arrest, but I kept my answers brief. The story would come out in court. Until then, I accepted their kindness without needing their pity. I wasn't the forgotten old man anymore. I was the survivor, the one who'd refused to disappear. And that identity felt stronger than any I'd worn before. But there was still one more place I needed to stand before I could truly rest. One more room where the truth needed to be spoken. The courtroom. The trial was set for early October. I arrived early, wearing the suit Margaret had bought me for our 50th anniversary. It still fit, though it hung a little loose now after months of cold beans and stale bread. Aaron and Tasha sat at the defense table with their lawyer, a sharp-faced woman who looked expensive. Aaron wouldn't look at me. Not once. Tasha cried silently into a tissue, her whole body shaking. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically. Photos of the basement. My testimony. The recording I'd made of Aaron's phone call about the inheritance. The forged insurance policy. Mrs. Caldwell's testimony about the lies she'd been told. When the prosecutor asked if I had anything to add, I stood slowly. I don't need to ask for their punishment, I said quietly. Justice is doing that for me. I just want everyone to remember that locked doors work both ways. They locked me in. Now they've locked themselves into something they can never escape. The judge nodded. When the gavel fell, it wasn't just a sentence, 7 years for Aaron, 5 for Tasha. It was an ending. Not a happy one, but a complete one. And sometimes, that's all justice can offer. Months passed. Winter came and went. Spring arrived with crocuses pushing through the last of the snow. I sat on my front porch watching the sunrise, something I'd never had time to do when I was working. The world felt slow again. Peaceful. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had kept me sharp during those basement nights had faded into something quieter. Wisdom, maybe. Or just exhaustion. I'd survived, but survival had cost me something too. My son was gone. Not dead, but gone in a way that felt permanent. Some losses don't hurt anymore. They just leave a space that slowly fills with acceptance. I'd learned to be lonely in a way that didn't ache. The kind of loneliness that reminds you that you're still here. Still breathing. Still watching sunrises. People asked if I'd visit Aaron in prison. I never answered. Some questions don't need answering. But there was one final thing I needed to do before I could truly let go. One last message to leave behind before I moved forward into whatever time I had left. Before moving to Greenfield Senior Community, a place where people actually wanted me around, I went back to the house one last time. I'd sold it to a young couple with 2 small children. They'd promised to take care of Margaret's garden. I walked through the empty rooms one final time, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. In the kitchen, I left an envelope on the table. Inside was a letter I'd written the night before. I forgive you both. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. The basement is unlocked now, but you'll never escape what you did there. Some prisons don't need doors. Some locks can't be opened. You'll carry this with you forever, and that's a sentence no judge could give. I hope it teaches you what you failed to learn from me. That every person deserves dignity, every elder deserves respect, and every action has consequences that echo longer than you think. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. They'd know who it was from. I locked the front door behind me for the last time. Not out of fear, not out of anger, out of closure. As I walked to my truck, using the key I'd hidden all those years ago, I realized something profound. Sometimes revenge isn't about making people suffer. It's about making sure they never forget who you were when they decided you didn't matter. And I'd made sure they'd remember me for the rest of their lives. I drove away slowly, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror. Margaret's portrait sat on the passenger seat beside me, wrapped carefully in bubble wrap. The spring sun was warm through the windshield. Ahead of me, Greenfield Senior Community waited, a place with activities and friends, and people who would remember my name. Behind me, Aaron and Tasha would be reading my letter in their separate cells, understanding finally that they'd lost more than their freedom. They'd lost the memory of who they could have been. I turned on the radio. A song Margaret used to love was playing. I smiled, thinking about her, about survival, about the strange journey from victim to victor. I'd started this story locked in a basement, forgotten and erased. I was ending it driving toward a new beginning, remembered and free. The locks were gone. The doors were open. And the man who'd been buried in darkness had found his way back into the light, not through violence, but through patience, strategy, and the refusal to become what they tried to make him. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to disappear. I kept driving. The future stretched ahead like an open road. And for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to see where it led.